Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. I am Ian Luck, President of Distribution at T2RL. For the last 3 years since I've been working there, I've been working with airlines all over the world, including some of you in this room, on distribution strategy, NDC, GDS negotiations, often thinking about how dynamic offers are going to work in that kind of world. And it's a pleasure to be here talking to you today. I'm joined by two also industry experts. Let's start with Mel.
Hi, Melanie, Head of Distribution at Norse Atlantic. Norse is a new startup, been running from Gatwick since, 12 months ago. And I started there in June this year. So this is how new the airline is. And I'll pass over to David.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's David. I'm an economist and accountant by education. I'm one of those strange people that came from the revenue accounting world at a major European airline. I looked after standards at ATPCO for the last 3 years, and now look after our distributed data.
Great. We'll all be sharing our industry knowledge. We won't talk too much about our past. We've all worked for different airlines in the past. I worked for British Airways and Qatar Airways, but I think we've all got good industry views that we'll look forward to sharing, as well as particular specialisms. There is the opportunity to ask questions, as we had in the last session. I asked some questions in the last session, hopefully to encourage people to ask questions in this session. We'd love to see some up on the board later on, so please, if you have got questions, let us know. I think we're going to start with a question for you. Let's see if this comes up somewhere. Yeah, here we go. So, how do you define distribution? If you really want to write the answer in the app, either now or later you can. If not, can you just have a think about that for a second and think about what that really means to you? It's a term that's used broadly in different ways. I think sometimes it means different things to different people. Remember, I started in BA in revenue management and later in sales, and the only thing I really knew about distribution was every 3 or 4 years somebody stood up on stage and said either we've just done new GDS deals, or we're struggling to do GDS deals and we're having an argument, and we didn't know much about, we weren't real experts in distribution in a lot of the rest of the commercial part of BA. I think that's probably changed over the last 20 years or so, that distribution's become more central to airline commercial strategies, and many distribution teams now work more closely with their revenue management teams and their sales teams. Perhaps we'll explore that. I don't know if we're going to see whether anybody has answered the question. I think we have an answer. Maybe we'll compare answers later on. So this is the definition that we talked about as a panel beforehand. And there's this important aspect of information and data being transmitted backwards and forwards. There's clearly an enormous amount of data that goes into every shopping transaction, every distribution activity that's done between airlines and the person on the other end, the travel seller, whoever it is that's interacting with the customer. We had a little bit of a debate about the word servicing. Servicing is not mentioned here. For many of us that work in distribution, actually, the first part of making the offer is the easy part compared to all the bits that follow once you actually create an order and then you need to change it or modify it. Some people think of that as re-offering or re-shopping. I don't know whether anyone's got any thoughts on that before we dive into the questions.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm really glad we're contextualizing it. I'm a great believer in using the same language to mean the same thing. And of course, there's the classic airline organization definition of distribution, and you're kind of going there. In ATPCO, we refer to create, distribute, present, service, and settle, that entire, what you might call the travel distribution ribbon. And then, of course, ATPCO also distributes data, so I'm just glad we're contextualizing it and using the same meaning here.
Yeah, I think that's right, that if you think there are different stages in the process, like servicing, maybe that's one of the steps that follows distribution, but clearly you can't just do distribution and not think about the rest of the chain. The whole chain has to work together, and you need to be able to link that across your organization and your technology and your strategy. Okay, let's get into some more detailed questions. So we heard on the previous panel quite a lot about what 3 airlines are doing in the way that they're creating dynamic offers. if we think here about everything that's changed about how dynamic offers and distribution go together, how important is the link between the two, do you think, over the last 5 to 10 years? Or how important is it to you in your airline today? Actually, maybe I'll start with David. Because I said I would start with David, so I should start with David.
No problem at all. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, and I've heard the use of the word today as well, transition. It's an evolution. I think it really has been a journey, and we'll talk about the journey a lot over this next couple of days as well. I think Ian, you and I have talked about the idea of airlines creating their own offers is not new. We had the days of Direct Connect in the 1990s. Technology has experienced exponential growth, as is the data that's available now. So I think there has been this churn in understanding new distribution capability, NDC, and what that means, and it not being synonymous with dynamic offers. You know, and for a long time, I think they were really coupled tightly together. We're certainly seeing now that that evolution has involved new distribution capability being used through with what you might call static offers, but also dynamic, as you just heard in the last panel, through EDIFACT as well. But I think if I could just leave it with one point, which is I think we're all at that realization that true contextualized science-based dynamic offers must have the airline creating the offer. They must have the relationship with the customer.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when I think about airlines, even some airlines that have changed their distribution strategy, and maybe the initial focus seems to have been more about cost and GDS relationships and those kind of things. I think nearly all the airlines that I talk to, actually, when they think long-term about why are they doing NDC, why are they trying to drive NDC adoption, there may or may not be some short-term cost issues, but generally, most people, when they're looking long-term, which we have to do in the industry we work in, are doing NDC fundamentally because they want to be able to distribute better products to third parties. They want to be able to work and sell more things more effectively via third-party channels. If you really weren't interested in indirect channels, and then you wouldn't bother building an API and creating. So I generally think the long-term focus and the logic for NDC for most airlines is very linked to dynamic offers, personalization, all these kind of things. I don't know what you think, Mel?
I have to completely agree. It's all about the selling, making sure that the right content's going out to the right people, that you're marketing to the right consumer. You've got the personalization that goes with that. You've got the offers that are available, and making those dynamic prices and having those fares and ancillaries available to those consumers is really important. The one thing that we've found is being able to sell to the right people reduces the distressed inventory side of things, because depending on the size of the market share in certain regions and the number of passengers per aircraft, you're able to adjust accordingly to those, so you're not overpricing on those particular products. Saying that, you know, I think from our perspective, we have that capability to enable that. EDIFACT obviously has a way to go, which I guess we'll cover shortly, but it's the kind of product that we can utilize and manipulate and really push out to the right people. So having that personalization is really important.
Okay, we definitely will ask you a bit more about what you're doing in North Atlantic on that as we go along. See what you can, well, as much as you can share. One of the questions we touched a bit on in the last session about how dynamic offers get into the channels and the distribution, and some types of dynamic offers. We touched on dual RBD being potentially airlines finding ways to distribute that in all their channels, but also some types of dynamic offers, continuous pricing being harder to do in EDIFACT. And I think one of the questions sometimes airlines are thinking about is, do I start work on dynamic offers first and try and build that, and I put it in my direct channel, or should I make sure I've got all of the capability using either NDC, or it could be another API standard? Many LCCs and others have APIs that they can use. So Do you create the content first and then figure out how to distribute it, or do you need to make sure all the distribution capability is ready and then create the dynamic offers? Certainly in my experience, a lot of airlines, especially airlines that value the travel trade, have tried to do these things in parallel or create the API first, although that has led to some criticism that airlines have created APIs and then there isn't any new interesting content to develop, and whether that's deliberate or not. I don't know what your view is on the sort of synergies between those two things.
Yeah, so I'd love to quote American Airlines Marshall Lapp. I don't think he'll mind. It was the Elevate stage that he said it maybe 3 years ago now. We must push the existing infrastructure that we have in order to make sure we advance both of them. So regardless of the order, and we've seen some really fantastic advances with airlines rolling out NDC through filed content. We're developing things like this year we rolled out the ability to differentiate price and product by aggregator, which of course is a new concept in NDC. Tom's favorite, to quote him from the last panel, positional match to allow significantly more price points and dual RBD. We'll be talking triple RBD as well. So those are great examples of airlines pushing existing infrastructure and trying it out. But I think from the ATPCO perspective, that value statement of consistency, regardless of whether it's NDC, whether it's Edifact, whether it's static, dynamic, we need to be agnostic to that and support all of it, and just not have any barriers in the way through our data. Thank you.
Triple RBD is a term I heard for the first time this year. I think Tom mentioned it at our conference. For those of us who are still thinking about dual RBD, should we do a plug? I think you've got a session tomorrow. Just if people are interested in that, any single, double, triple, whatever flavor of RBD.
Yeah, thank you for the plug on that. It's really, again, about common language so that we're all across the industry, all 450 plus airlines, knowing what it means to have more RBDs and then no RBD in a world of science-based contextual dynamic offers. So thanks. Do come tomorrow.
Happy to do the plugs. I think I genuinely actually, in a very serious note, when I was at British Airways, worked with my colleague Jerry Ferran, who many of you will know, on the RevMan side, and we implemented dual RBD for additional price points in 2018, and it was a very important part of our strategy, and I would encourage airlines to make sure they understand it. There are other ways to get dynamic offers into market, but I would encourage you to consider that as an option at least. We said we'd ask you a bit more about what you're doing in North Atlantic. Being a startup airline, what does that mean as you think about both dynamic offers and the distribution of those offers?
Yeah, this is a good question. In respect to that, we've been able to look at the infrastructure and say, okay, where do we want to go? And our CEO, Bjorn Tore Larsen, he comes from cargo shipping. And he kind of has a travel background as well, but he basically said, everything, why do we do it like this? Why can't we do it like this? And it's like, well, actually, that's a good question. So we've been looking at everything that we do, and he's very good at understanding things very quickly. He's a very intelligent man, and he understands what's going on. So he says to us, well, I don't see why we should do it like this when we can do it like this. So we've actually got a rather large bank of data scientists working on all of this infrastructure. So anything to do with our website, our APIs, our NDC, they're working on all of this to get that technology pushed out there to try and, well, not try, they are automating everything that's going on. Sometimes there's a few glitches along the way with parity across the channels. For instance, the website will show something that they're A/B testing in respect to the API NDC channels, not necessarily getting that because it's under testing. Mm-hmm. But making sure that that content's going through and having the ability to do that is so important. With the data scientists, they're able to tap into everything that we're doing and look at how that's working and how they can automate that process. So when it comes to pricing, revenue management, the website displays, all of the technology with that, with the heat maps and everything that goes with that. They're just amazing at doing those developments. Obviously, being a startup, there's a lot of gaps, but they know and very aware of those gaps, and they are plugging those gaps as they go.
So it sounds like even though you're a startup, and I think you've told us before, it's a relatively lean airline, like a lot of startups have to be, sounds like the data science part is an area that you've decided to invest in, as that's a real priority.
It is. It's a real priority. So, there's only a few of us in distribution, a few of us in revenue management and pricing. We've got, I would say, near on 30 data scientists working. Now, we have 12 aircraft, so that's a lot of people doing the technology side of things. But this is all part of the startup and the ramp up to get everything to a position that we're happy, rather than just an MVP. We want to go a step above that. But then once we actually get there, we'll be able to then scale back a bit and then just do developments as and when we go.
And it's interesting to hear that those people are working on direct and indirect together and focused on. Some airlines historically almost seem to manage the two channels slightly separately, but it sounds like you're very joined up. You've got a big focus on doing that as one.
We really do. So, as I said at the beginning, I've been with the business for 4 months, since June, and I go to our head offices in Norway, in a little town called Arendal. Some of you may have young children, know Frozen. Yes, that's the Arendal. Okay. No castle, but it's. I go there monthly and sit with these guys and run through what I'm working on, what they're working on, so we can work together and make sure that the product managers and distribution are aligned, that the data scientists are well informed. So when it does come time, it does come time to do that development, everybody knows what we need and when to deploy.
Let's go on to thinking a bit about, we've touched a bit on the differences in channels. It sounds like in many cases your direct and NDC is quite joined up. Sometimes we've seen some airlines, as we talked about earlier, managing to get some of their dynamic offers out via the EDIFACT technology. There are other types of dynamic offers that are harder. Have you got views, David and then Mel, on how do airlines address that challenge of trying to manage the different channels and different technology?
Yeah, sure. And if I can address it from this angle, I think we've seen there's a lot of learning to do from the EDIFACT channel, and certainly, if I can take it to NDC as one sort of bridge the gap there, that the design team that we're running very quickly came up with things that worked well in the EDIFACT environment, but are gaps, obviously, because you're missing that integration to agency front, mid, back office systems. So we have some great examples of debate on, for example, how a consolidated market seller markup will work in filed data. We got one last week on language translation for NDC offers as well. But I think that the three things that we're making sure, again, I'll just sort of wrap my bit up with the ATPCO perspective, is we have the watchwords that ATPCO data must work throughout NDC, whether that's the IATA schema. 21.3 currently will be 24.1 very shortly. We need to make sure that all of the data and processes that we have support NDC pricing or any other type of pricing for that matter. So again, agnostic there. And then these gaps, we have a very transparent governance where we can talk, we have this unique position where we can talk as a community, address these things better together and look at those gaps. And again, it kind of ties back to airlines trying this. And as we try and we increment and we transition, that we'll find these things and we can address them in small pieces and make progress that way.
And those design teams have people from, it's not just airlines, there are other participants, is that right?
That's right, yeah. So Alex mentioned 600 plus external folks. So it's technology providers, airlines, and we have more channels now because we have the Route Happy element now. So, and I think we're discovering as well in the NDC environment, it must be a discussion between technology provider, agency, and airline. And that really goes to a question in the previous panel around bringing the travel trade along.
Yeah.
That conversation is growing.
And you have some travel sellers, travel agencies that participate as well in the forum.
We do. So we have around attributes, we have design teams around that, but we're finding, again, that on the NDC side of things, they're a crucial component to making sure it works end to end.
Very good. I think that is very important, and I generally would always encourage airlines to be trying to engage with their travel sellers and understand. You may not always agree on everything, but if you can share information transparently, I think it makes a big difference. What about in North Atlantic? What about the EDIFACT, NDC, Dynamic Offers challenges?
Yeah, we're not actually in GDS at the moment.
Yes.
So we were focusing on the website as a direct.
Yeah.
Coming in 4 months ago, we're starting to develop the trade. So we do have an NDC API, and we also have a direct API, which are similar but different.
The direct API from the Navitaire PSS.
Yeah, we're on the Navitaire PSS. We're very lucky in that respect. We already have literally the one order in Navitaire, so it's very helpful. So having the direct API, we're able to connect to whoever and control that ourselves. Whereas the NDC API is the IATA standard API, and that does obviously need the development still. So having that parity, we're doing the best we can to keep it. Any sort of functionality that we're doing through the website and our direct API, we always make sure that we can do that through the NDC API as well, just so we've got that parity and alignment across partners. Like I said earlier, it does vary on occasion, and one partner over another will have different content, but we do, with our data scientists, make those developments on our side to plug that gap. So we're not always dependent on Navitaire to make those changes for us. We do fixes.
Okay, that's good.
in the layers.
So you have a good platform, but you're still building on top of it where you need to.
We are, yes, very much so.
What about more, again, thinking about the indirect channel, a lot of airlines have different products they might distribute in the indirect channel, often more than the direct channel. We have package fares or marine fares or corporate deals or other things, and in many cases those are more a feature of the indirect channel than the direct channel. Do we hear ATPCO, or do you hear airlines and others, David, thinking about how those sorts of products will work in a dynamic offers world?
Yeah, sure. And I think maybe some important context, and maybe everybody knows this, but ATPCO serves direct and indirect, so we're agnostic to those. But I think referring back to the first session today, we try to map this out as a journey for 450 plus airlines who are members of the ATPCO community right now on those two axes. So price sophistication, which is often talked about in terms of science-based pricing. You're hearing more and more about product sophistication now. I think we all agree that the way that pricing is built sort of in a more siloed way, that it's fares and rules and then finding fees and then ancillaries on that result and then taxes on that is not that efficient. So it feels like there's a lot of investigation on that going on into how to scientifically price ancillaries as well. I think we heard that in the last panel as well. But I think the one to watch for here is how ancillaries, brands, concepts like dual RBD, no RBD, baggage, filter into product catalog, and that evolves the market. So it feels like that's a really interesting sort of focus as we move forward.
That makes sense. I definitely think it's almost the next level of complexity, but it's coming. And airlines, I have worked with airlines that do have some of their private fares or net products that do work via dynamic offers. Maybe it depends on Cap 25 type. I don't want to talk about categories too much. I'll get beyond my knowledge quickly. But yeah, there are different ways to do it, and I think airlines are going down that path. What about you, Mel? What's your view about sort of broadening dynamic offers from simple fares to private products or ancillaries or other things?
Yeah, I completely agree with what David's just said. We've also, with what we're working on, we're still going through the the product phasing of getting the dynamic pricing
You're
right.
still at a relatively early stage. Yeah.
So the published is what we've been focusing on. However, since I've started, we've also taken on a sales team as well, globally. So it's the sort of thing that they are asking for those IT fairs and corporate fairs. And my job is to figure out how we provide that. Having the technology, I say to these guys, look, I'm here to support you. This is why I'm here. Tell me what you need and I'll get that for you. They're coming at me from all angles with all sorts of things, which is keeping me exceptionally busy. Trying to come up with that, though, is interesting because not being in Edifact, and most tour operators, corporates are all in GDS, not on NDC. I'm trying to come up with that program of, okay, which way do we go? Do we go down the Edifact route to be able to target these customers, or do I try and push them onto the NDC API route? So that's the decision process at the moment.
You don't have to tell us which way you're going. That's not something you should share.
No. So this is really the discussion at the moment. Watch this space, I guess.
Okay. I think we had a few more questions. I'm also conscious we've got a few questions from the audience that I don't want to miss. I think we've covered a lot of this. Maybe briefly, just if you're really trying to manage dynamic offers in both, is there anything else you'd want to add to that? We've covered a lot of this already, but.
Yeah, maybe just to mention that it's been, for me, just looking at the economic environment as a former economist. I guess you're always one if you've done it once. But seeing travel technology engage so heavily in it, it's very interesting to see the computer reservation system to global distribution system to passenger services system, the PSS, and now we start to see that dual aggregator PSS GDS role. So just really keeping an eye on that, on how that evolves over time, and I think it all comes back in the end to that word interoperability, just making sure it all works in these hybrid models, because we'll be there for a very long time.
Right. I remember when I was at BA, we said it publicly, it's not a BA secret. I've also heard United say that when they do additional price points or continuous pricing, their general strategy is that the dynamic offers they bring will always be better than the static one. Otherwise, people not sure where they should check. There's already quite a lot of shopping in the world. Ideally, if you can give some consistency to structure. So I think some airlines do that. Is that something that you try to do when you're thinking about, I guess you haven't got Edifact pricing yet, so it's not an issue, but what's your view on kind of how dynamic offers should work for you, for Norse?
Yeah, so the dynamic offers we've got are generally lower, to be honest. I mean, our airline's ethos is, we're a low-fare, long-haul carrier.
Yeah.
At the moment, we've literally just launched Cape Town with a $28 fare, from Cape Town to London. That is obviously a static fare because that's our promotional pricing. But then outside of that, we do have the dynamic pricing as well, depending on how full the aircraft gets. So it's a big thing. We do have that hybrid model, I guess, to promote those fares that we want to.
And I think certainly when anybody talks about personalisation, if you want customers to give you their data and identify themselves to you, you need to make a better offer than they would have had otherwise. Otherwise, they're not going to share their data with you for very long. So I'm sure that's an important point.
Yeah.
This was touched on earlier. I don't think we should spend too long on this, but it's, Brynn, if you have any thoughts on how dynamic offers will work in Interline and CodeShare, that's Interline and CodeShare is a wonderful complexity that many of us have to deal with in our industry.
Yeah, just having been at IATA last week, and they had their shop order pay standards board advisory, there was a lot of conversation on the Interline piece that we're really starting to make good strides on own airline. Interline, a bit difficult so far, but there's a lot of work going on orders now, and it feels like that next piece, the real sort of the value piece of fulfilling the transaction is going to be crucial to that. So I see it coming, just not that far advanced yet.
Yes, I think the offer order, the full order change is an interesting, that could be the thing that unlocks it. I mean, there has been a lot of work for a long time, but not, I don't think many airlines have managed to get Interline and NDC using the legacy technology. Just exposing that offer is relatively straightforward, depending perhaps on your technology setup. But doing the true kind of offer and offer response is more complex. We've seen some pilots, we've seen some progress, but it may be that we need order to unlock that.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the catalogue work is essential to that as well. So that's a really central piece, the ability to interline sophisticated prices and products.
But with the reference of the product catalogue, with at least knowing what the products are, even if the prices are changing frequently. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mel, what about Interline and CodeShare from a startup, long-haul low-cost carrier point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we want to eventually go into. We're working with DoHop at the moment with the interlining,
the virtual alternative interlining.
Interlining, that's it. So yeah, we're working well with them. There is scope for us in the future to look at this. We just need to figure out which route, again, whether it goes down the Edifact or NDC. Ideally, we want to move away from the Edifact, but you can't take 60 years of development on one product. And as was mentioned in the previous session, we've been around, 10, 15 years. It's going to take at least that again to get things moving into a good structure. So, maybe we will have Edifact for a while yet. But that's
partly to help with things like Interline, which is when we talk about the transition to offer and order over the next decade. There are airlines that say we want to do offer and order in the next 3 years, but even those airlines tend to say, but we also know that the whole industry won't do offer and order, and we have lots of Interline and CodeShare and joint venture partners who will still be using Edifact. So we're going to need to live in a hybrid world for some time. That's something nearly every airline and a lot of the vendors recognise with the products they're offering.
Yeah.
That's definitely right. Maybe we should come to some of the questions and then come back to our questions at the end, the ones that we prepared. So here's a question from Seth. Do you think the traveller should know they're receiving a dynamic offer, or should it just work? Anybody?
I'll defer to Melanie for that one, I think.
Yeah? I'm happy to go as well, but you want to go first?
Good question. It should just work. I don't know if there's anyone from Airways here in the audience, but I booked a flight the other day to go back to Australia, and I looked a couple of times, and each time it was kind of incrementally rising, and then the next time I looked, it had really jumped, and I thought, yeah, they know I want to book this flight. So but I still booked. It worked.
Good data science. Obviously, they did.
They knew I wanted to go.
Yeah.
So, still booked.
My instinct, I don't know if others have a view. My instinct is probably the traveller shouldn't or doesn't need to know. Maybe if the traveller is one of you or one of us, we would know, and we'd want to know how it was done, and we'd be trying to read the Fair Basics Code and figure out what was going on and what booking class was it in, all those kind of things.
That's exactly what I was doing. I was doing a bit of research at the same time.
I think it's an interesting thing about, does everybody else in the value chain know? Does the travel seller know it's a dynamic offer? And that may be useful to them as they're thinking about their technology. That's an interesting question as well.
And I will say, just from the business, being a business-to-business company as opposed to facing the consumer, that it's interesting that reflects exactly our philosophy on the data needs to be the data, and it's agnostic and it's seamless, and we talk about things like seamless service and settle. So it's very similar view on the business-to-business side for me.
This might be a question for you, David, the next one. Are there any standards set within the industry for dual or triple RBDs? And if there isn't, do we have a plan for a standard?
I'm really comfortable to take this one, thank you. So The really quick idea of ATPCo's governance is it's very transparent. Anyone can raise a business problem, and it goes through this set of stage gates, which makes sure we're addressing the right business problem, that it resonates, that it's priority. Both dual and triple RBD do have standards. Dual is published. Triple, I believe, is still in review at the moment. It's published. Doesn't have an implementation date. But maybe that's just a good plug for, please do use our portal, My ATPCo, to have a look at this. If you're in the ATPCo community, you can view any of these things. So yes, it's out there. Do educate yourself on technically what those standards look like. And again, come tomorrow and find out a little more about it there.
This might be for Mel, and I might be able to give an industry view on this as well. Do you support dynamic offers in the reshop change? We mentioned servicing is very important.
Yeah, so going back to the earlier item with the distribution, needing to look at the whole picture. And my philosophy is it's not just from the consumer through the website and then being able to shop or to pay. It's a matter of being able to service and then how that is accounted for in the end of the booking process once payment is processed. So making sure that the accountability is there. I'm married to a revenue accountant, a bit like your good self, so he's always drumming into me, don't forget about finance. So I'm always thinking about this end and then this end. So if I'm unsure, I always say to him, how would this work? And he always adds that piece in. So it's always really important to make sure that that is definitely taken into account.
We've got revenue accountant consultancy service at home. There we go. Useful.
And it's interesting to hear on the servicing side of things. And ARC also has a task force on NDC right now, but it's very popular to talk about how servicing is broken for these new things. And actually, a lot of the use cases you explore, they were broken in the EDIFACT world as well.
Yeah.
And there's not really that understanding that these are just problems that we need to fix generally. They didn't rise to the top of the priority list in EDIFACT. We probably want them to at this point. So just interesting hearing that word on the street.
Yes, that's right. I saw Kathy Morgan from Sabre quoted at GBTA this year, and she said, there's lots of servicing things that didn't or don't work very well in EDIFACT. Over 40 years, we've often created ways, workarounds, we've written scripts, there's ways that we can fix them. And Kathy said that NDC servicing, when we get it right, we've still got some gaps to go, but when we get NDC servicing right, it should be better, simpler, and we should be able to fix a lot of the things that we could only really work around in EDIFACT. And I have seen some airlines, United is probably the one I read most about, that was really trying to be explicit on servicing an NDC is going to actually be easier. In disruption, you don't need to type a waiver code into a PNR anymore. You know, if you made a booking in NDC and you go back as the travel agent or the customer in the app, so it's direct or indirect, channel agnostic, you'd be able to see that the flight's plus or minus 3 days, you can change for free and there's no cost, but if you go 4 days out, then there is a fee because the limit of the policy is that, and that sort of thing, rather than emailing out the paper to the agencies that says, this is the policy for storm, whatever it is. I think that, hopefully, as you say, servicing will be good on that one.
Yeah, just adding on to that too. So our website has all those sort of capabilities as well, but the frustrating thing is, because we've been website development first, we're still going through the mobile technology, so we haven't got that development. And even our API partners, frustratingly at the moment, which is under development, those customers that have booked through those API channels still need to go through it to our website to make those changes. So it's a little bit disjointed at the moment in that respect, but it's still easier than needing to contact a contact center to be able to make changes. So. And everybody's aware, you know, when that disruption comes through, that the customer is notified that they need to go here to make that change.
Yeah. So digital where you can, contact center there if you need it.
Exactly.
but making sure it works digitally where possible.
Yeah,
just
just trying to
to-
make it as frictionless as possible.
Yeah, just a quick add. This is another good example of the crucial work that kind of goes on in the background. That one of our design teams is around 100% automation of change, and it's a really good example of Edifact, NDC, whatever it might be, that the stat that was quoted at the start of that design team was 40% manual servicing in the indirect world, and it's unacceptable to move to a world of offers and orders there. So, again, it was something we implemented this year, changing the system assumptions around the standard for change and refund so that you assumed automation under certain conditions rather than drive to manual. But clearly servicing is going to be an important topic as we move on to orders.
In a new distribution world, how contextualization would look in a B2B agency realm? Contextualization could mean a lot of things. If I understand it, I'll have a go. Feel free to comment. I mean, certainly in a direct channel, the airline controls the screen. You know, you can know what to put, and you're only selling one airline or maybe a couple of partners. Clearly, if in an indirect channel, the agencies, one of their core functions is to make sure they're bringing the whole marketplace to the customer. And so I think it is more complex for an indirect channel to bring more information, more context, if that's what the question's about. If you want to speak to us in the break, feel free to grab us. Does that make sense to you? The challenge is the indirect channel is it's more, just by nature, it's a bit more complex.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things spring to mind. That obviously you have agency profiles, and that's part of traditional GDS functionality. You have airlines looking for more contextual data, but I think just in the broader sense, as ATPCO evolves, and we're talking about all the needed data to be able to form fully contextualized dynamic offers, that kind of personalization data it's early days, but it's a good example of new data that we're looking at as we evolve to that platform, along with shopping data and economic insights and the rest.
That picture probably means we need to ask the last one. I will try and answer Derek's question that I saw, which was, is dynamic offers in content differentiation between channels important? I think that's totally airline strategy driven. I talk to airlines that are very focused on getting all of their dynamic offers and all their best content out in every channel, in every shelf they possibly can. Often they're investing in APIs to help them do that. And they're trying to push as much as they can in Edifact as well, and then they go on top. There are other airlines that are more focused on their direct channel, regardless of whether it's dynamic offers or not. So I think that's a very airline strategy-driven question, but happy to chat more on the break, Derek. Last question. What advice would you give for airlines that are just in the sort of early stages of starting to explore dynamic offers?
So for me, it's a bit of a recap, and it's leverage the technology that is there and the governance that you have, obviously within ATPCO. That's the kind of unique community. Stretch it as far as it will go, as Marshall Lapp said a number of years back. Try it out, increments. Increments is the way to go to make progress. And finally, I think just make sure you're letting ATPCO take care of those bits that need to be more standardized and interoperable for you.
Your thoughts, Mel? What advice would you give?
Choose who you work with. You don't need to say yes to everybody who wants to connect to your APIs. Your content is what they want. You have control over the content as well. You don't need to ensure that there's parity also amongst your preferred partners versus the non-preferred partners, but just holding on to the control of your content is really important. With this new technology comes new challenges, and just being aware of what those challenges are will prevent any issues moving forward with technology breaches, problems. It's just a big moment where you really need to think from a strategic point of view for this market, who do we want to work with? Because not necessarily the biggest is the best. Just be very aware of who you're working with and why, and are they going to take your business and target those customers according to your business model?
I think the one thing that I would add, I think that's all very good advice, is to really try to get an industry picture. You need to get this clear internally. You need to get RevMan and sales and distribution and revenue accounting and IT and all the stakeholders kind of on board. That needs to be joined up. Some airlines are better at that than others. I would encourage that bit. And then the external side, I mean, you're all here, so you're already clearly keen to speak to industry colleagues, to speak to ATPCO, to speak to other people. I think all those things are good. I would also encourage people to speak to technology vendors, ones you do use, ones you don't use. Travel sellers, there are some travel sellers here. If you're an airline and you haven't spoken to travel sellers and said, what do you guys think about dynamic offers, I would do that. Unless you're an airline that's, I was going to say, unless you're Ryanair and you're 100% direct, they're not 100% direct anymore, they've got OTA deals. So I would encourage nearly all airlines also to speak to travel sellers, vendors, ATPCO, IATA, anybody that can give you advice on this stuff, because it's a growing area, and I don't think anybody in the room knows all the answers.
No.
0000. We are out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for your questions. And if anyone's got more questions for any of us, please grab us in one of the breaks. Really nice to talk to you all.